Hi, everyone. We are finishing off our lesson on understanding inheritance by doing some practice questions on Punnett squares. So Punnett squares are diagrams that predict the outcome of a genetic cross. And for our purposes in this course, we are going to be focusing on monohybrid crosses, which means we're only going to be talking about one trait at a time. During parts one and two of this lesson, we talked a fair bit about pea plants because they have traits that are easy to see and easy to breed. So we're going to do this first example about pea plants. So as it says here, a homozygous tall plant is crossed with a homozygous short plant. Tall is the dominant trait and short is the recessive trait. Okay. So first of all, we need to decide what letters we're going to use. I'm going to use the letter T. So tall is dominant. So we're going to use an uppercase T to represent a tall allele. Short is the recessive trait. So I'm going to use a lowercase t to represent that recessive allele. All right. So the first step is to figure out the genotypes of the two parent plants. The genotypes are the letter combinations that represent the alleles. So it says that we have a homozygous tall plant. Okay. Well, that's being crossed with a homozygous short plant. All right. So first of all, we need to remember that homozygous means the same. So if the plant is homozygous, it has two of the same alleles. Homozygous tall must have two uppercase or capital T's as the genotype. I'm using uppercase because we know that tall is dominant, and I'm using two of them because homozygous means we have two of the same alleles. Now, our homozygous short plant, we see this word homozygous again, so we know it has two of the same alleles, and we determined that the trait short is recessive, and so it's indicated by a lowercase t. So the genotype for the homozygous short plant must be little t, little t. Homozygous tells us we have two of the same alleles, and short is recessive, so two little t's. All right. So now that we know the genotypes of the two parents, we are ready to make our Punnett square. So we start by just drawing a tic-tac-toe type of diagram here. There we go. Now, remember that one of Mendel's laws is the law of segregation, which means that alleles separate when gametes form. And because we're talking about breeding plants, we're talking about offspring, that means we're talking about how the gametes are going to separate. So what this means is these two alleles for the homozygous tall plant are going to be written separately because they're going to combine differently with the other parent plant. So my homozygous tall plant, we have our two uppercase T alleles here. And our homozygous short plant, we put our two lowercase t's over here on the left. This square just gets left blank. You don't have to put anything there. And it doesn't matter. You could have had the put the little t's here and the big t's here. You're going to get the same. You're going to get the same answer either way. All right. So in order to figure this out, this t here is going to be transferred to this square, and it's also going to get transferred to this square. This t goes to this square and to this square. Similarly, this little t is going to go to this square, and it's also going to go to this square. This little t goes to this square, and it goes to this square. So this is the pattern that we follow. So what this means, our possible offspring genotype in this box would be big T, little t. If I move over here, again, following the arrows that I just drew, we have big T, little t. Over here, big T, little t. And then last box, we have big T, little t. All right, so these are my 4 possible offspring genotypic possibilities. So the way I would write this, I would say my offspring genotypes are 100% big T, little t, because 4 of them were all the same. And my offspring phenotypes are what we're actually seeing. So these plants are either short or tall. So if our genotype is big T, little t, that means it's heterozygous because we have 1 of each letter. If that's what we get, if we get 1 of each, we get 1 dominant allele and 1 recessive allele, we're always going to see the dominant trait. And in pea plants, tall is the dominant trait. So because it's heterozygous, it has 1 dominant, 1 recessive allele, we're going to see the dominant trait. So our offspring are going to be 100% tall. All right, we're going to do a second example. A heterozygous yellow pea plant, it's lots, heterozygous yellow pea plant is crossed with a homozygous green pea plant. Okay, in pea plants, yellow is dominant and green is recessive. Okay, so we need to figure out the genotypes. Remember, genotypes are the letter combinations of these parents. So if yellow is dominant, we're going to represent that with an uppercase Y. Green is recessive. We will represent that with a lowercase y. It doesn't really matter what letter you use, but it is important that you use the same letter. So you wouldn't want to put like a Y for this and a G for this. You want to stick to the same letter. You need to have the uppercase and the lowercase. That's how you keep track of what's dominant, what's recessive, and what trait we're going to see. So choose any letter, but make sure you're very clear about your uppercase and your lowercase. All right, so we know that yellow is dominant. So uppercase, I'm choosing Y. Green is recessive, so that's lowercase. Again, same letter, Y. So now we need to figure out the genotypes of the parents. A heterozygous yellow pea plant. Okay, well, heterozygous means we have two different alleles. So it must be one big and one little. So it has one allele for yellow and one allele for green. A homozygous green pea plant, well, homozygous means it has two of the same allele, and green, well, then it must have two little y's. So those are our parent genotypes. The one plant is big Y, little y, and the other plant is little y, little y. So now that we know our parent genotypes, we're ready to draw our Punnett square. All right. So remember, we start by doing a tic-tac-toe grid. Oops. That's better. Okay. And now we put in the parent, alleles. This top left square you can just ignore. You don't need to scribble it out. I'm just trying to make this easier. Ooh. Okay. So our first parent, the heterozygous yellow pea plant, was big Y, little y. So remember that when we're doing our Punnett squares, we have to separate the alleles. So big Y and little y. Our second parent has two little y's. Little y, little y. Okay. Some people like to do these in two separate colors. If that's your jam, go for it. So now we need to figure out the possible offspring combinations. There's going to be 4. So we're going to have to figure out a combination for this box, a combination for this box, for this box, and for this box. So we'll start with this box. I'm going to take this big Y and bring it down. I'm going to take this little y and bring it across. Big Y, little y. Okay, perfect. I'll do this box next. So I'm going to drop down this little y, and I'm going to carry this little y across. Okay, little y, little y. Okay, 2 down, 2 to go. So for this box here, I'm going to drop down this big Y and take this little y across. Okay, big Y, little y. And then for this last box, I've got to drop down this little y and bring this little y across. So little y, perfect. There is my Punnett square. This y doesn't have a curly tail. There we go. Now it does. This y doesn't have a curly tail. There we go. Now it does. Do these even look like y's? They are. Don't worry. Okay, beautiful. So what's next? We did our Punnett square. Looks great. We have to write out the offspring genotypes and phenotypes. Okay, so offspring genotypes. Start with that. Okay. Well, we have 2 of the boxes are big Y, little y, and the other 2 boxes are little y. So half are big Y, little y, and the other half are little y. Okay. So 50% big Y, little y, and the other 50% are little y. All right, cool. So next, we need to write the offspring phenotypes. And so the phenotypes is what we actually see. So what traits are we going to see in these two possible combinations? So the big Y, little y, that's heterozygous. And I know it's heterozygous because I have two different alleles. If something is heterozygous, if it has one dominant allele and one recessive allele, we're going to see the dominant trait. Okay. Anytime something is anytime something is heterozygous, we're seeing that dominant trait. So I have to go and double check. Well, what's the dominant trait again? Oh, yellow is dominant. Okay. So for this big Y, little y combination, those ones are going to be yellow. And then the other 50%, the little y, what's little y again? Oh, little y is green. So if I have two alleles for green, well, then these plants must be green. I hope this was helpful to you. Punnett squares can be a little tricky, but the more you practice, the easier it gets. So go try and do a few on your own and then double check your answers, and hopefully you will be an expert in no time. All right, we'll talk soon.